So it's my privilege to introduce our speaker who we had before. If you were around for the octopus talk, that was a very popular favorite from our assemblers, and she is back. So Ginny Hofmeister grew up in the Bay Area of California, had a love of the ocean from an early age. She initially thought she would study marine mammals, but in college at UCLA, she learned that invertebrates are way cooler. She earned her PhD at UC Berkeley, researching the behavior and ecology of the California octopuses, and later completed a postdoc fellowship at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego. She has continued to study octopuses, but now applies her knowledge to abalone restoration and lobster fishery management at the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. When she isn't underwater, she's playing with her dog or making quilts. Welcome, Ginny Hofmeister.
All right, get all the stuff set up. Can everybody hear me all right? See nods, excellent. Thank you all for having me back again. I had a really great time the first time, and I wish I could be there in person, as I know we all wish, but this works fine because I can do Zoom, my Zoom attire, sweatpants on the bottom and something professional on top. So, so some of you may have heard me talk about octopus, and my octopus world and my abalone world definitely overlap. But today I'll be focusing on the abalone stuff because it's where most of my research and work is focused right now, and it's super exciting. And for those of you who are nerds like me, I was pretty pleased with my title slide here, so we'll just come on. So a lot of you might be familiar with abalone. Let's see, there we go. Oh yeah, so I'm just going to talk about first, what is an abalone? I know a lot of you might not even know what one is, especially if you didn't grow up in coastal California. Where did they all go? I'll talk to you something that I'm calling the abalone obstacle course, kind of the past, present, and future of the work we're doing. So a lot of you are probably familiar with abalone in this sense. You've seen it in jewelry. Their shells, especially the inside of their shells, are beautiful. And so they get used a lot in jewelry. There's also a really long cultural tradition of abalone, both for the native peoples that lived in coastal California and other coastal communities. They were traded. There's this really great book. Oh, I was going to bring it. It's a great book just called Abalone that just came out that documents the history and cultural importance of abalone through time. And it's really fantastic. I can share that with Laura to send out to everyone. But the way I'm most familiar with abalone is this, a rock, a rock that looks maybe like it's not a rock. And this is usually what I'm looking for when I am scuba diving and doing this work. So this is an abalone. It's a type of marine snail, a single-shelled snail. And when it's not inside, and when you don't have the shell separate, this is what you see. And they do have, parts. This is in fact the front. This is where its face is. And that's its back. That's where its butt is. And then there's a few key features that you can look for if you're trying to distinguish between a rock and an abalone. One is to look out for these respiratory pores, which are these pores along their shell that where they respire, where they breathe, that's where their gills are. And also if they're reproducing, that's where they release their eggs or their sperm. And they do have a big old foot, which is, essentially just a giant suction cup that allows them to hold on tight to the rock. And they do have faces, and I've learned in my life that people tend to care more about things that they find cute, and I'm here to convince you abalone are cute. Look at that face. Look at those eyes. You see those eyes? They're adorable. Okay, so we're all going to care about adorable abalone, those little tiny faces. Okay. So in Southern California, we're actually kind of in a abalone diversity hotspot, which is really cool. We have several different species of abalone, whose ranges happen to overlap right here in Southern California. We have the red abalone, which is actually a very ubiquitous species. It goes all the way up to Northern California and a little bit into Oregon and down into Baja. We have the white abalone, which we're kind of at the northernmost end of its range here in Southern California. The pink abalone, also kind of at the northern end. The green abalone, which is a more shallow subtidal animal for those of you who were in coastal California in like the 60s, 70s, 80s, and you remember going to the tide pools and fishing for abalone with your family. The green is most likely what you would have gotten. We have the pinto abalone, or the threaded abalone, which goes all the way up into Alaska. The black abalone, which is also a very intertidal species, a little bit smaller. And finally, the flat abalone. So it's kind of, and as you see, all of these species look incredibly different, super easy to tell apart. There'll be a quiz later, I'm sure you'll all ace it. But the one I'm going to focus on today really is the white abalone, which is the first marine invertebrate to be placed on the endangered species list. And it was placed on this list in 2001. And it's a fairly unique abalone in that it's incredibly lazy. So this video I'm showing you right now is a time lapse. And this, we had the camera set up. This camera was set up to take a picture every 30 minutes for 4 or 5 months. And this abalone did not leave the frame of the camera. I think less than 5% of the time it left the frame of the camera. They are an exceptionally lazy species. They sit on the rock, they just wait for food to drift by, and that's their life. So that's good on the one hand for us as researchers, because it allows us to closely monitor them, kind of know where they all are, because you can find one, go back a year later, and it's still there, hopefully. But it also meant that they were very easily targeted during when we did have a fishery. Let's look at Boomerang. All right. So where do they all go? We ate them. And yes, that is me. That is a picture of me and my father and my now husband. You know, there used to be we used to have a large commercial fishery in California, kind of all throughout the West Coast, and thousands of tons of abalone were taken. They are delicious. There used to be a recreational fishery in Northern California, and that's what I grew up doing. I grew up diving with my dad for abalone, and there's a really important cultural aspect of this, which I mentioned earlier. That's not only the history of the Native peoples in the state, but also present day. And these times that I spent with my dad in the process of catching the abalone and processing it for eating, it's a big family gathering, it's a big cultural event, and it's a very important part of a lot of people's identities as coastal inhabitants of this state. And so that that value cannot be forgotten in all this too. But we did eat more than we should have. They don't grow very fast, and they're not terribly populous. So we just took too many. So the commercial fishery was shut down in the 90s, and there was a recreational fishery just in Northern California, north of San Francisco, that shut down a couple years ago because of crazy environmental changes. That's a whole other story. I'm not really going to focus on it. But why it matters for abalone specifically for population density is they're what we call broadcast spawners, which means they don't necessarily, meet up and bump uglies for reproduction. They have to be in high enough densities that when they release their eggs and release their sperm into the water column, the physical adults are close enough together where those eggs and sperm are going to match up and they're going to make a baby. But we have the situation we have now where they're out there, but they're too spread apart. There aren't that many. They're still going through the motions of releasing those eggs, releasing those sperm, but they're too far apart. They're too dispersed. There's not enough of them that the chances of those eggs and sperm meeting together are very low. And so they're effectively not reproducing naturally in the wild. So what can we do? This is where I come in with my colleagues. We do what's called population restoration. It's also called stocking or seeding or outplanting. I think I'll probably end up saying outplanting the most, but I sometimes go back and forth between those terms. I just wanted you to know those all mean the same thing. Just essentially putting more out there. Very simple. And so now I would like to introduce you to what I call the abalone obstacle course. Now, some of you who saw me my octopus talk may remember I had an octopus game that we got to play. I am working on an abalone game. I don't quite have that yet, but it is in the works. But for this, the abalone obstacle course are all of the obstacles that the abalone and us trying to save the abalone are working on. You know, all the obstacles we have to overcome in order to reach this successful outcome. This outcome of there's enough of them in the wild, they're at dense enough, you know, there are dense enough populations, and they can reproduce on their own, and then we can step back and watch our work happen. So I'm going to just briefly go through, though, all the different things that we're considering and learning as we worry about restoring these populations. So the first is size, which is a big one. What size do we put them out there? We're raising them in the lab. You know, we can make them, we're making babies in the lab in captivity. How long do we keep them? So, you know, you can either, they are, you know, they do have a larval stage, a planktonic stage, where they're floating around in the water column, and then eventually they go through this metamorphosis, similar to a caterpillar turning into a butterfly, where they turn from this weird looking alien thing to what we know more of as abalone. Now, when they're little in this tiny larval stage, you know, there's some pros and some cons. The first off, you know, this is definitely the cheapest option, because once they're larvae, you don't have to worry about raising them and spending all the time and space and manpower to raise them to a certain size. So the cost is low, and that's great. However, detection, which is one of the metrics that we use to determine, is what we're doing working? Are we successful at all? Is low to zero. We know, you know, we do have the genetic, we know the genetic crosses of the parents. So in theory, if we were to find abalone 10 years from now, and yes, they do grow that slow, it is 10 years, can we take a little tissue sample and test it genetically and see which parents it came from to determine whether or not it was a wild, you know, wild bred guy, or one that came from, you know, one of the ones that we put out there as larvae. But that is, you know, that's the long game, and funders and managers and everyone who, you know, they want to see results. And so they, you know, it's hard to do an approach like that when we don't have immediate or semi-immediate, you know, data on whether or not it worked. And also, oh, sorry, this error should have been red. They also, predation on that size is really high. That's just what happens when they're little like that, which is not, you know, something we want to avoid. So here's this kind of middle size. The cost is lower, still not as low as with the larvae, but it still takes 2 or 3 years to get them to this medium size. When they're this medium size, detection, better. You know, still not great, because they can hide under rocks, they can hide in little cracks and crevices. But okay, better. And predation also, all right, a little bit lower. They're not as many getting eaten. But, you know, they're still kind of octopus snack size, so that's a concern. And then we have this largest adult size. And, you know, in a perfect world with all the money and all the time and all the people, this is probably what we would do. But it costs a lot of money to get an abalone to be kind of adult size is 6 or 7 years. And then as they get bigger, they need more space. So they know more tank space, more aquarium space, more food, more of everything. And so that cost aspect is a really tough part. And then we also have, but when they're bigger, they're much easier to find, and the predation on them is much lower because they're kind of out of that octopus snack size. So these are all the size things that are going on in our mind as we're kind of planning how we're going to restore these populations. So next in the obstacle course is this idea of transport stress, which is, okay, we got the abalone in the lab. We have to get them from the lab to the ocean. And abalone are unfortunately delicate little flowers, and they're most relevant though is they're hemophiliacs. So if you accidentally cut their foot when you're taking them off of a surface, if they get cut too much, they'll just bleed and bleed and bleed until they die. So it's incredibly annoying for us who are trying to transport them from the lab to the ocean. So we're trying to find ways to minimize how many times we have to scrape them off of a surface, put them on another surface, just to minimize the risk of getting cut and potentially bleeding out. We also have to consider temperature. We are a cold water Even though it's now like 80 degrees in January, the water is still 55 degrees. So these are cold water species. So we have to be aware of that they don't have thermal stress. Make sure that they have enough water to respire because they need that in order to breathe. And also, distance. A lot of times they're going from lab to truck to boat to ocean. And so thinking through all the steps of the process is important to reduce stress as much as possible so that by the time they get in the water, they're going to be freaked out. Let's not ignore the facts. They will be freaked out, but hopefully as less freaked out as we can help. And so now we're in the ocean, and we've gone through a lot of thoughts too and trying to figure out what's the best place to put them. Because, similar to humans, we have different preferred habitat based on the size we are. We grow from, a crib and our little toddler bed to the big kid bed to the adult bed, and we as we grow, so does our habitat and what works for us. And same for abalone. When they're bigger, they like things like exposed rock faces and large rocks and big crevices. When they're this medium size, they like under ledges. They like being kind of around urchins or spiky little urchins for protection under large rocks and small rocks. And then when they're itty bitty, they don't really go under the exposed faces. They need to be a lot more protected. They like to live in the holdfast, which is the base of kelp. So we have to make sure we're choosing a habitat that has all of these components to accommodate the abalone at all the different stages of their life as they grow. And then once we got a good habitat picked out, now we have the predator aspect, which again, for those of you who saw my octopus talks, I've learned a lot about octopus, which is one of the primary predators of abalone. But there are a lot of other things out there that like them. This is one of the time-lapse photos of from one of our recent outplants or recent stocking experiments. That's a lobster. You can see he's got a little abalone in his front little claws. It's not nice. So lobster will eat them. Octopus, I don't know. I wanted to give you guys a chance, see if you could spot the octopus in this picture. There it is, that lump. And here's, all of our abalone in the little tube thing. And the octopus is just waiting. So predation is natural. It's going to happen no matter what. So we just have to find ways to reduce it as much as possible and make choices along the line as we move through the abalone obstacle course, make choices to try to reduce it and give the abalone the best shot possible. And in the same way that as they grow, different habitat types are important for them. As they grow, there's different predators that can feed on them. We got some predators like fish, like sheephead and cabezon, that really are kind of more opportunistic and they'll go after them immediately post-stocking. We have things like sea stars and these things called pellets whelk that are more opportune. They're more scavengers. If the abalone is dead or weak and dying, then they'll go after them. And then we have this kind of cluster of different predators that are just kind of, always going to be there, always going to be working on eating the abalone. As they get to a certain size, this bigger adult size, they do, get out of octopus snack size, out of lobster eating size, but some things like bat rays can crunch. I don't know if you guys have seen the giant bat rays. Bat rays here in California get huge, and they can easily eat an abalone that's 7 or 8 or 9 inches with their little crushing mouths. And then we also can't forget humans. Poaching continues to be an issue of abalone in our state. And so this is an ongoing problem, and we can't ignore the fact that we are predators in this ecosystem too. So if that wasn't enough for the abalone, we also have to make sure they got food. I'm not going to spend much time on this. It makes sense. You need food to live. We need to make sure they got food for them. We make sure they have food. And if all of these things are successful, then we can hopefully get to a place where we have enough abalone together in high enough densities to reproduce on their own. Oh boy. Okay, so like I mentioned at the beginning, the white abalone was the first marine invertebrate to be placed on the endangered species list. That was in 2001. And in 2016, they were identified as one of these species in the spotlight. And good news is that this approach has been renewed for another 5 years, so 2021 to 2025. We'll continue the funding and continue the work, which is very exciting. But what this program is, and it's funded by NOAA Fisheries, which is a federal agency. It's identified a group of endangered animals that not only are they critically endangered and will go extinct unless humans intervene in some way, but more importantly, we have enough information, we have enough knowledge, we have enough resources to succeed. It's not just, throwing money in an empty pit. We have a very good chance of being successful and a very good chance of preventing these animals from going extinct. And there's 5 components of this. One is to find new adults, identify good habitat, this captive breeding, we're breeding them in the lab, and from that, stocking, putting those captive bred animals into the wild, and also outreach, which, hey, I'm doing right now. Now, we don't necessarily we didn't want to try all of our techniques and learn with our precious endangered white abalone. So we used a guinea pig, a poor little red abalone, which is not endangered, but still could use a little population boost. But they're also easily bred in farms. We have a few red abalone farms in California, so we can just buy some abalone, so we don't have to worry about caring for them and the lab space and the personnel. We can just buy them and use them to hone in on our methods and really, improve it. So we've done this a few times. Oh yeah, so we've done this a few times, and also, thinking about this abalone obstacle course, thinking about these components and how we can minimize stress and maximize survival through this whole process. So we've tried several different sizes, from a couple inches up to, like 5 or 6 inch size abalone. We do transport them in these little tubes, so we reduce when we can just take them out of the water in the lab, still in their tube, and then put the tube in the ocean, so you don't have to scrape them off things. We've tried different habitat types, really complex habitat, more simple habitat. We also put them in these cages called Barts. Scientists love acronyms, so the BART stands for the Baby Abalone Recruitment Trap. It's essentially just a big wire cage with a bunch of cinder blocks in it, and it provides some initial safe habitat for the animals to go into. We closely monitor the predators. Sometimes we remove the predators if we can. This is a very big aspect of my work, obviously. We do a ton of habitat surveys to make sure there's enough kelp and enough food and enough, good habitat, and that habitat stays good, throughout the years. And then we monitor and count and hope that we're doing things right and that we have animals that persist. So we've done this with our guinea pig red abalone 3 times, once in LA, once in San Diego, and then again in LA in 2019. And I'm not going to, yeah, so 3 different experiments. Oops. Oh. Oh, okay, sorry. I know what's happening. I copied this from another, hang with me, everyone. I copied this from another talk where I had to pre-record my voice. So that, hi. And how do I do this? And I had never recorded my voice before. And I forgot that it's tied to the slide itself. So that was weird hearing my voice again. Okay, I think that'll do it. Sorry, everyone. That's fun. Yeah, so we've done 3 different experiments. I'm not going to spend too much time on them, but we've put out thousands of red abalone out there, tried different sizes, tried different proportions of different sizes, so rugosity is the term we use for habitat complexity, so high complexity, low complexity, and different numbers of sites. And from this, we've learned a lot. And we've learned a lot in every aspect of this abalone obstacle course that has helped us inform the next big thing, which is doing this all with our precious endangered white abalone. And we could, we had many conversations. We could have gone on with red abalone and tried things forever till the cows came home. But at some point, we just had to jump in, realize we were graduating to the endangered species and give it a go. So we did. And the exciting thing about coming back and talking with you now is last time I was talking to you, November 2019, we were literally days away from doing this for the very first time. And so November 2019, we did the first ever stocking of white abalone into the wild ever. And I really want to emphasize, if you're not in this weird little world like I am, it's, this might not seem as crazy, but some of my colleagues, and my colleague is, one of them is Ian here, who's in his little purple blue wetsuit, has been working his entire career to this event, 30 years. There's been 30 years of his career has been leading to this moment where we're finally ready to start putting captive bred white abalone into the ocean and working on restoring their populations and preventing them from going extinct. So this was huge. It was very exciting. COVID hit, as we all know, and that definitely messed up our plans, but we did manage to do it again in October of 2020, which was really exciting. We, of course, had some modified COVID protocols, less people on the boat so we could spread out, masks all the time. So, we made it work. And in spring of this year, we're going to do it again. And this approach is called pulsed outplanting. And it's, it's essentially trying to mimic what nature is actually doing, where, you don't just throw, abalone don't just appear in the habitat and then nothing ever gets added again. Things are abalone reproducing, more babies are coming in, more juveniles are coming in. The population is constantly growing and building. So we're trying to mimic that kind of natural phenomenon more so. So, we'll stick out a whole bunch of abalone. Some will die, some won't make it. That's fine, that's natural. So we do it again, add some more. Some of those will die. That's fine, that's natural. We'll do it again. And over time, that population will build and build and build to hopefully a point where, where there's enough of them out there that they can successfully reproduce on their own and we don't have to do this anymore. But this is a long-term game. What it means for me is job security, because we have, it's going to be about a decade of doing this before we'll really be able to assess the populations are in a good enough spot that they can survive on their own without us intervening anymore. So, here's our motto: save the abalone, save the world. So that's lots of partners. This is tons and tons of people working on this. And I know that I will be sticking around afterward to answer any questions. I know we'll be going into a breakout room to talk. So if you have, happy to answer any questions that you have, like octopus, I can talk abalone all day. And thank you very much.